Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Krishna Kumar Venkatachalam. On behalf of Inago Academy, as part of the Open Access Week 2019, I heartily welcome you all to Inago's panel discussion on open access. The burning question that we are hoping to tackle here today is this: has the scientific world truly opened itself to open access? Now, before we go ahead, I would like to give you all a brief introduction about Inago. Inago is one of the leading author service providers globally, and our author first, quality first approach ensures that our authors receive the best quality output and excellent user experience at all times. We take pride in not compromising on our quality systems and processes at any cost, and our services are designed keeping in mind the need of the authors and clients that we serve. Now, let me introduce our esteemed panel members for this discussion. Joining us from New South Wales, Australia, Professor Richard Degree. Professor Degree is an internationally acclaimed astrophysicist, editor, and a publishing consultant. He is currently appointed as an Associate Dean at Macquarie University, Australia, and is affiliated with many national as well as international astronomical societies. In addition to his numerous publications, he is also a recipient of more than 25 research grants. Presently, he is on the editorial and review board for many leading physics and astronomy journals. Next, we have Professor Michael Preeler, who is joining us from Chuncheon, South Korea. Professor Preeler is a distinguished researcher with over 15 years of experience in media and communication studies. He is currently affiliated with Hallym University, South Korea, and has many prestigious awards, research papers, citations, grants, and a book as well, to his credit. Professor Preeler is associated with established publishing houses like Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, etc. as a reviewer, and serves on the editorial board of some very popular journals. All the way from Lisbon, Portugal, we have Dr. Rafaela Gozolino. Dr. Gozolino is an accomplished medical researcher who currently works as a principal investigator at Nova Medical School, Lisbon, Portugal. Her dynamic career includes association with top-notch international journals as a peer reviewer, editor, and she's a lecturer at the University of Ulm, Germany, and Jean Piaget University, Cape Verde, and many other roles such as scientific advisor, speaker, and a consultant. Finally, from Munich, Germany, we have Ms. Frock Ralph. Ms. Ralph is is an open access expert with over 20 years of diverse experience in the publishing industry. She has worked with leading publishers such as Tiener Institute of Physics Publishing for the last 11 years. Ms. Ralph has been involved in the strategic development and revenue generation for a portfolio of open access journals. And a little bit of background about myself. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by profession, but I've been involved with Inago for over a decade, primarily in the role of as an editor and as a trainer for editors. Currently, I'm focusing on training editors, conducting publication-related workshops for authors and researchers from around the world, and helping authors draft papers in medicine and life sciences. Now, a formal welcome to all the panelists. Hope you're all having a great day from various corners of the world. Now, let's get to the topic. I'll start the panel discussion with the following question to Professor Degree. Professor, in your opinion, which factors are critical for choosing the right journal for publication?
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. This is a very good question, and it's probably at the forefront of the minds of many young researchers. I would say the most important factor to choose a journal is your audience. And the second most important factor is still your audience. You need to write your paper. You write your paper based on the research you've done. It needs to be read by your peers. So you need to think about the journal that your peers are reading. So first of all, target your audience. You may want to look at other journals that have published research that's similar to your own research, that of which your research might be an extension, for instance, and journals that would have published previously published research in your field might be a good fit for your research. So make sure that the story you tell in your paper actually fits the journal's aims and scope. So check the instructions for authors about that. Once you've decided on a journal, audience first, journal fit second, you may want to go for the highest ranked journal, however that is defined, because that's a little bit controversial. Some people use impact factors, others use various rankings. You want to go for a journal that gives you prestige within your institution and eventually, hopefully, bonus points for promotion or tenure. Of course, all of this depends on whether or not it's easy enough for your work to be found by other people in your field who might want to use it and refer to it and provide citations. So your journal, the journal of choice, should be available in abstracting and indexing services. Now, it's needless to say that all of this is based on the fact that I would recommend that you always go for peer-reviewed journals. The peer review process is very important. There's not even a question in my mind. Now, I know that we're talking about open access and open data. In my field in astrophysics, we're actually quite good at making data sets available, data behind the figures, tables that are generally available, data in repositories at various observatories. So ideally provide the data to your peers. Whether or not that's best done in an open access journal depends on the other factors as well. So even though we're talking about open access today, open access doesn't come to the top of my list.
Okay. Very interesting points. Dr. Preeler, do you have anything to add to this?
I think this was a very excellent summary by Professor Degree. In my opinion, I can just follow. First, you have to basically decide and find a journal that fits to your area very well. And I think in many academic institutions around the world, what counts is really the rankings of the journals in order, as Professor Degree said. Many professors still need promotion or tenure evaluations and so on. So in the end of the day, I think in most departments, there are even not that many choices. There's probably some kind of lists provided of, it might be 10, it might be 15, depending on the academic area, how many journals you can choose from. And maybe your specific research might also not fit to all these journals. So in the end of the day, you might have only a very small list of journals actually available, which you can choose from, I think.
Excellent, excellent.
Basically, what I was saying is that everything has been said already in this very nice summary that was provided by Professor Richard and Professor Michael before. So in my area, in medicine, actually, the most important thing is really to choose the journal that mostly fits the scope of the research, which is something that is not often done because basically researchers are trying to publish mostly in higher factors, regardless of whether choosing rightfully the journal that best cover all the topics. And therefore, this is the most critical things that I would point out.
Right. Ms. Ralph, a couple of interesting points have been brought up. One is the fact that Professor Degree does not consider open access as the #1 thing that that one should consider when publishing. And Dr. Preeler has brought up the fact that open access journals are not probably equally distributed among research areas. There are some research areas that have less. So anything to add, especially on these points?
So
Well, I would just emphasize that the ranking of the different points being of importance to the authors and the researchers is, Richard, 100% with what you have been just saying. And one proof we can give from a society being heavily involved with over the past few months really is IEEE. And what we've seen here is that the quality of the journal is what counts, being them transactions or being them a meta journal, meta open access journal, what counts is the quality. And that doesn't only include the impact factor or any kind of metrics you have of such kind, but it does include the turnaround times, the peer review process, also things like open access administration. So I fully share the view that despite various reports saying otherwise, open access is not among the 4 first aspects to be covered when it comes to publication and to disseminating your research output. Especially in engineering, we have seen with IEEE an uptake of less than 1% of open access, and that just corresponds to that we have different research area responding differently to open access options. Astrophysics and physics is certainly one of the most advanced, and engineering, when it comes to technology and sciences, natural sciences, might be one of the latest really adopting that kind of publication paradigm shift.
Right. So I guess we can move on to the second question, which is sort of related to what we were discussing. So I'll pass this question on to Professor Preeler. What do you think is the most critical barrier for researchers to publish in open access journals?
Okay, the most critical barrier, I can only speak for my area, which is social sciences and to a certain extent humanities. I would say the biggest barrier in my area is a lack of established open access journals. The ranking and the impact, as I previously mentioned, is very important for many universities. And however, just to give one example, for example, within communication studies, which is my specific area, there's actually only one open access journal within the whole list of SSCI journals. And this one is even not the top tier journal. So it just shows that there's not that much options in terms of real open access journals. So I believe that's the main reason why open access journals are not used that much in my area. Because if universities basically don't value and reward your publications in open access journals, then academics will basically not publish in these journals because they still need for evaluations, promotions, and so on, they need to get their points basically. I would also like to mention that most journals have the option for open access. I know that's not exactly the main topic here, but this is nevertheless an important point. But that's mostly very expensive. So while it's a great idea to publish these articles open access, many scholars cannot afford the requested amounts. However, more and more funders are actually going in this direction, as most of you probably know. For example, the European Commission is saying it should be their research funds or people who receive their funds should basically, they require immediate open access, and there are other funders basically following this kind of steps. So I think it's going more and more into this direction, and I hope it's going into this direction because especially people in developing countries, which I think is one of the next questions also, for them it's even more important open access because there are many countries where it's very difficult to basically access all this knowledge and information. I think it's just fair that everybody has the same chance to read all this important scholarship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to add to this, as you know, when I was reading up about this, so the most reputed journals in each field may not be open access, and vice versa, you may not have high quality open access journals as well. So that's one aspect that we have to consider. Professor Degree, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Michael's comments that there are simply not that many well-established journals. My own field, if I look at my own area, it's astrophysics. We have maybe 5, highly ranked, well-established journals. They offer the option to pay for open access. Not many people take that option, probably only because their funders require it. Having said that, as I said in response to the previous question, we are actually in my field very good at sharing data, particularly public data. Most of the time observations become publicly available after a proprietary period of a year. Data that's published can be requested, and it's kind of a gentleman's agreement. It's understood that it should be provided to authors who want to do something with that kind of data. So there's in my field, there's no real need at this point. There is, of course, the issue that if you don't have access to the published paper, you would like to have some type of access. And again, I think our field is among the first movers in this area, in the sense that since the 1990s, we've had a preprint server called arXiv, and we'll get back to this later in the questions, where more than 90% of my colleagues actually submit their accepted papers, sometimes even their papers at from the time of submission. So if you want to have a paper that you don't have access to because it's behind the paywall, it's almost, well, it's more than 90% certain that you can actually get it from one of these preprint archives. So the need is not really there, at least not in my field.
Right. So depending on the subject area, I guess we have already touched on open science, and it's not just open access; it's open databases, open science, hosting of data, and I guess some fields they are better suited for such large data to be shared, hosted and shared. Dr. Guzzolino, do you have anything to add to this?
So I think that in medicine, the most critical barrier for publishing in open access journals is really the quality of the journal, because there are very few open access journals that are medium high impact factor, almost none, and therefore the tendency is really to publish there.
I guess we have lost connection with Dr. Guzzolino.
Primary focus of the research. So, and this is basically what I do think is the most critical barrier. So not publishing their very important results, because all big stories need then to be published in high impact factor paper.
Exactly. So to touch on the last question as well, as in one of the things that researchers have to look for if their paper matches the aim and scope of the journal that they're publishing in, and if there is a conflict in that, and if let's just say I'm trying to publish a case report, many medicine journals do not want or do not encourage case report because they are low levels of evidence. So suppose I do not find open access journals that have case reports as an article type. So researchers can struggle with that. Ms. Ralph, do you have anything to add to this?
Not at this point, really. I think that the inability to pay an APC has added to the whole discussion, not only when it comes to quality, but also when it comes to, do I have to pay or can I pay? Do I have the funding to pay an APC? And what is the APC? Is that included in my grant or not? All of these questions do add up to the other aspects which just have been covered. I think that is a motivator or a discouragement as well.
Yeah, we're touching on the different types of open access here, gold and green.
Yes. In addition to that, yes.
Yeah, I guess we can move on to the next question, which is addressed to Dr. Guzzolino. What is your take on open access journals levying the publishing cost in the form of APC, article processing charges? Do you think it's fair to the authors, especially those from maybe less privileged nations?
Well, actually, as it was said before, even in developing countries, there is the right to be better educated. So indeed, in these cases, that there are most of the journals that are waiving the processing charges and the publication for the publication fees accordingly. Recently as well, many scientific journals analyze case by case, and even in very wealthy countries, if there are very established laboratories that unfortunately in the recent years run out of fundings, the journal consider or the editor consider whether it's worth to allow these authors to have a publication in their journal, most probably because as well it's a prestigious name, the researcher, and I mean, in short of funds happen basically to everybody in life, or almost to all scientists. So therefore, yes, in those cases in developing countries, and in those specific cases I mentioned, yes, that I agree whether it's fair to leave basically the publication fee, although it's something that is difficult to do, because as well open access journals, they do rely to cover the publication cost on article processing charges. And I think that here the most critical point is that there is a general not transparency, if you allow me, in what an APC corresponds to that journal, because it varies quite a lot. So the APC basically, it covers from all the publishing business to maintain that journal, and not just to the to the editorial work, but also to the administrative work, to the maintenance of the journal itself, to the webinars and how customer services and all these direct and indirect costs that nobody knows. So basically, it's like it depends. It varies quite a lot from journal to journal, of course, and it's like to go basically to the mechanic. It's very difficult, a different price if I just want to change my wheel or if I want to change the engine of my car. But nobody knows these prices. So this, I think, that is not fair for the authors, because everybody should be allowed to really understand what they are paying, which is definitely not the case. So yeah, this, I think, that is the most critical point.
Professor Digri, so we are primarily talking about gold open access here, I guess. APCs are the main thing. So what do you think, green and diamond, platinum, or bronze open access? I mean, do they vary according to field? Maybe in your field, maybe there are more green open access journals. And what do you think of that?
Yeah. Most of the journals that we deal with have papers that are behind a paywall for the first 12 months, and then they're open to the world. That's green open access. As I said, we have these archive repositories and other types of repositories, so this works in my area. I'd like to actually latch on to what Rafaela just said. It costs money to run journals, and so you cannot expect to get everything for free, of course, because there is a skeleton staff usually. There's running costs of the journal, possibly editorial board meetings, advertising, and a whole slew of things. Many journals are actually run by scientific societies, and it's their main source of income to support what they do as a society as well. So I have no issues with paying for publication, but I do agree that the costs should be made clear as to what are the costs for, and also many authors from lower middle income countries can request fee waivers for most reputable journals at this stage. So I think there's like a two-edged sword here.
Yes, very much. So, I mean, open access has this problem with incentivization of journals. I mean, incentivization of papers, which are now probably based on merit, and maybe redirection of funds towards maybe only open access type, publications. So, Professor Preela, would you have anything to add to that?
I think again it depends a bit on the academic area, because like fundings particularly in humanities and to a certain extent also in social sciences are certainly much smaller than in natural sciences, for example. So that even if you get a grant, the amounts are quite small. So even if you get then mostly like $2,000–3,000, whatever the open access costs, then that might be already a quite high percentage actually of your overall grant. So in that sense, for the small grants, this might already bring some problem. In addition, I kind of thought about if it's a problem or not to actually pay for it. I think the whole system I find a bit problematic. That's why we also have this open access discussion, that basically we as authors do everything for free. We write the article for free. We do the peer review for free. Very often we sit in the editorial board for free. And then our academic institutions have to pay a lot of money actually to subscribe to the journals. And now in addition, I should even pay them money to publish it in the sense of open access. So I think to a certain extent there must be some kind of change going on, and I know this is one reason why this open access week is existing, probably because many people are discussing actually that the current system is not sustainable in its current form, at least.
Yes, excellent points raised. Now, one of the things that we are discussing is the comparison between the subscription model, the conventional model, versus open access, with primarily focusing on article processing charges. But the conventional model as well, eventually the authors or the people who are publishing have to pay for the page publication charges, especially the print journals. Now, those can run up to thousands of dollars per page, especially when it comes to color photographs. So, Ms. Rav, what do you have to say in response to the fact that authors, researchers feel that they are paying too much to get, let's say, published to open access journals?
Well, first of all, I'm a bit Janos-headed on that question, I must admit. First of all, personally, even though I have been a publisher for the longest time of my professional life, I never fully understood why the costs were transmitted to the author, where that idea came from. Yeah. That is my personal opinion, really, and my personal question to the whole model. On the other hand, moving back to being a publisher, the transparency of APCs and how you actually make a journal sustainable, as Richard just mentioned, has become an issue more and more. And I think I do see that mainly societies really make an effort to move to more transparency in order to inform the researchers, the funders, and the authors how they actually operate when it comes to costs and financing the publications. I think there we are moving ahead. I'm just talking for societies, not so much for commercial content providers. When it comes to green open access, I think some societies have very generous policy and mandates, like if you mention the Optics or Photonics Society, SPIE, for example, they allow no embargo, version of record, etc. So there are different approaches when it comes to green. Nevertheless, that's a kind of unfunded mandate, if you wish. So we do need to look into business models or sustainability models as transparently as we can in order to fund the gold open access model. And I think this is still the better one because it does look into the future way of publication output and dissemination. So yes, the author, it is not just that the APC is kind of is added as a burden onto the shoulders of the author. On the other hand, we need to be more transparent and we need to have a cost associated with publication. So there's no doubt, there's no free lunch.
Transparency, exactly. I mean, that's basically the foundation of open access itself. So this is a nice segue to the next question, which I'll hand over to Ms. Ralph. The purpose of making research outputs open access is to increase its reach and impact. But do you agree that publishing in open access journals is making innovations and research accessible to researchers who genuinely need it? Example for scholars in less funded labs, especially in developing nations?
I would say yes, definitely, because we already see a minimum of 30% more usage and more citations, depending again on the subject area. But thanks to open access, whatever the model behind is, being it green, platinum, gold, whatever, we do see an increase of at least 30% of usage and citations. So yes, definitely, that is very important and it is a very good intention. What we should bear in mind is that the beginning of the whole idea was the credo to simply say what has been publicly funded and supported as research should be publicly available. And I think what we have come as publishers, we have moved quite far away. I need to say that as a bit of a self-criticism here, really. We have moved away very far from this credo by considering different ways of open access. But all in all, I would definitely support the idea. And I would say that we have come very far when it comes to medical sciences, life sciences, and especially high energy physics and particle physics, like initiatives like Cielo in Brazil or Scope 3, that actually shows that a high increase of usage and citations have been achieved over the past decade.
Excellent. So in my non-academic career, in my practicing time, I was fortunately, I graduated at the top medical school in India, and we had a large, catalog of journals that we had access to. But I'm sure that the institutional budget, especially from developing nations, would not be as high to support conventional subscription costs. So I'm totally behind the concept of open access. Dr. Preela, do you have anything to add to that?
I can also just agree to that. I mean, as I previously already mentioned, particularly for developing countries, but not only developing countries, even in other countries, more and more universities are kind of complaining about the increasingly high costs they have to pay to subscription fees. And I also want to agree to Mrs. Ralph before, in the sense of there's no question about that it's much more accessible. Also from my own experience, recently I also had the luck because of a co-researcher who had the fund for that, and his university basically supports that every article has to be published open access, so they had the money for that. And this article got more citations than, even though it's just 1 year ago published, and many articles are published many years ago. So it is really a very big difference. And I'm sure it's not just citations, it's also how many people see it, basically. So there's a big difference. Yeah. And it not only applies to developing countries. I think even other people sometimes, it just takes time to search the articles and whatever, and if you don't have direct access maybe, and if it's open access, it's very easy. You just click on it and it's there.
Professor Degree, anything to add?
I can only agree to what has been said so far.
All right. Dr. Gozzolino, any points to add?
Yeah. I also agree that these open access journals it's easier, and that they do make they do increase the number of educated people, especially in the developing countries. And I'm promoting science in Africa, so that is extremely important in Africa to have open access journals, because otherwise there would be no way to pay a subscription to publisher. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'll get to the next question, which is directed to Professor Preela. So this is, I think we have all answered it in different ways. So the question is, do you think a researcher's field of study directly influences their affinity towards open science? So Professor Preela, please.
Honestly, when I prepared the question, I wasn't sure about it because I only know about my area. But now listening to the discussion, I can see clear differences. So Professor Degree clearly emphasized that it plays a very big role in his area already, open science. Well, I have to admit, unfortunately, in my area, which is social science, humanities, it's still playing a relatively small role. There's a lot of, however, there's a lot of talk nowadays about it, and you can already see some journals changing, like really requiring data. But this is still relatively new, so it's not long established. There are some few journals start doing this. So in that sense, I can really see a big differences between the academic disciplines. But I hope that my area will also further go in this direction and provide more, for example, data, for example, not just the text, also data which can be shared then and also used by other researchers, and also to a certain extent it also helps to detect some fraud and so on. So as I said, it seems to me, this is what I learned already from today's discussion, there are huge differences actually between the academic discipline when it comes to open science.
Excellent. Dr. Gozzolino, you mentioned you promoting research in Africa, and I believe PLOS recently, I think maybe 4 years back, launched a journal, Emerging Tropical Diseases, and I think that's an open access journal, and that's one of the journals that is probably focused on developing nations in Africa. So you can take over from there. I mean, what do you think? As in, do you think people from the field of medicine have a more predilection toward publishing in open access papers, journals?
In Africa, you mean specifically or in general?
We are talking about different fields, so let's talk about medical research.
Yeah, because in general, I mean, it's not the open access journal are not the most wanted, let's call it like this, because basically are more inclined to publish reviews rather than original research articles, at least for medical and health sciences. You might find much more hypothesis, opinion, review type of article rather than research articles. And the research articles that you might find are normally not let's say, the primary project that the lab is focusing, just because big stories have always had the tendency to be published in high impact factor journal. But of course, then to publish open access article in high impact factor journal, then it depends on the funds of the lab, because of course they have extraordinary higher prices of publication fee.
Splendid. Professor Digri, Dr. Preeler brought up the fact that it's not just the text, the manuscripts itself, themselves. We are talking about data and methodology, etc., etc. So what do you think of that? As just because open science allows large data to be stored and shared and copied and played with in different fields, is that the reason why physical sciences are researchers from physical sciences like publishing in open access journals?
Yeah, so actually this discussion has made me reflect on why we actually advocate open science so much in our field, and also in other large fields that are very international. I think an important reason here is that I don't have a lab at my university. I have an office and a laptop, and that's where I do my work. I get my data from national or international facilities, which are funded by the national government or through intergovernmental agreements. That means taxpayers' money. I mean, a single university can have a small facility, but nothing of the type that you really need to do cutting-edge science these days. And so it makes sense that this taxpayer money goes back somehow to the taxpayer, and that's by providing open access to data, or open data in essence. Yes, there usually is a proprietary period of a year or sometimes slightly longer. That's because the researchers who actually propose to obtain the data need the time to analyze and publish the data. But after that, it's up for grabs. And I think that's why. And the reason that I'm saying this is that I sometimes talk to colleagues who work at very wealthy institutions that have their own fairly large facilities. And one institution that comes to mind is the University of California, which has its own private observatory, which is world class. When you suggest to them, and I have done this on occasion as a journal editor, to provide access to the data upon publication, then they balk and they stand on their hind legs, and they don't want to do it because it's their private data. So I think this is an issue of where does the funding come from, and how is this shared with the community?
Excellent. Ms. Ralph, anything to add to all these points?
When it comes to open science, I think we started with open access and we have accomplished that more or less. But I think we're moving into different challenges from now on when it comes to open science. And I think one recent development you might share, Michael and Richard and Rafaela, one thing we have come across is a lack of infrastructure, a lack of taxonomy and metrics really when it comes to monitoring open access and open science activities as a whole. And I think this is a new challenge at the horizon. When we do include open methodology, open access, as well as open data, etc., etc., how do we make all of that not only sustainable, but reproducible as a whole? Yeah. Starting just with one example, we have asked ourselves recently at IEEE, working with Code Ocean, how do we publish capsules of algorithms and codes in the future? Do we make them open access? Do we want them to be open access accessible? Or do we want them, like you just said, Richard, do we prefer to kind of keep it in our hands just because we have funding issues, or we want to file a patent, or questions like that? So I think open science has accomplished a few aspects to it, which are standard more or less, but we're moving ahead. And in total, I would say we have not even gone halfway of open science yet. I'm not sure whether you would agree to that on astrophysics. In social sciences, humanities, I would have definitely said we are below 30%. But when it comes to archive, etc., other subjects, we might be at, I don't know, maybe, Richard, 60% open science. What would you say?
Professor, yeah. So do you agree, Professor Degree and Professor Preela, about this?
Actually, one of the issues that this comment brings to mind is that data sets from different facilities often come in different formats. And so how do you, particularly if you want to combine data from different facilities, which we sometimes do because we use different facilities to look at the same part of the night sky in my case, right? How do you combine that? You need to be able to do that in a smart way. And since like the last 10, 15 years, in my field, some of the major international intergovernmental organizations have been leaders in making in setting up like a metadata approach where data is described at a higher level so that anyone who can access the higher level can actually use the data in a smart way. We call that virtual observatories, where the data sets from many independent observatories are combined or can at least be accessed through web links. And so in that sense, I think our field is leading the pack there.
Dr. Preela?
First of all, I certainly agree that social science and humanities have a long way to go, as Mrs. Ralph said. And she also mentioned there might be also some issues we don't think too much about, and it's only starting nowadays. There might be some academic areas where there might also be ethical issues, or maybe some of the data or information we actually don't want to really share with everybody. So this is certainly concerns we have to also think more about. It's very easy to say everything should be open access, but that's probably also not the solution.
Excellent. So moving on to the next question, this is back to Professor Degree. In your opinion, does engagement in open science practices, which includes data sharing, open access publication, etc., does it affect tenure and promotion decisions by research organizations and funders? Do you think, if you publish in open access, open science, if you practice open science, you have a better chance at moving ahead in your academic career?
I'm afraid my answer is no. I don't want to quite stop there. I've been on various promotion and tenure committees and have written letters on behalf of people who were up for promotion and tenure. What universities are looking for, what institutions are looking for, is whether you can bring in the money. It's the bottom line that many institutions care about. Have you got a track record of bringing in grants? Do you have potential to bring in large grants? Do you produce a lot of output, research output? What is your international standing? Are you on the horizon of international societies where you might serve as an editor, etc.? That counts for much more. If you really go out of your way to engage in issues like reproducibility, open data, and those things, then I would say that almost becomes part of your research persona. And in that case, it may be taken more seriously because it's part of who you are as a researcher. However, that kind of approach only applies really to a very small fraction of the research community. So I stand by my initial answer, no.
Excellent. So I guess everybody has a position on, whether they support open science like wholeheartedly, and whether they want to go back to subscription journals based on the merits of the journal and the track record of the journal. So I guess some of the funding can be to the researchers. I mean, I have read some reports saying that some of the funding societies they would prefer their funds being directed to open access journals because it opens science. And so, researchers might be, asking themselves the question, I mean, should I, just because I'm getting funded, should I be publishing in such journals? Professor Preela, do you have any comments on this?
Honestly, I don't have to add much. I think it was already very well elaborated before. I also, in my opinion, it's basically a no. It will not help that much for promotion. I think it's only a very minor point, open access. There are many other issues like that you published in high-ranking journals, which is in my area not open access. So in that sense, it's really a no. And many other points. What my previous speaker said, but open access is really not the main point for promotion at the very moment. At least it might change in the future. We will see.
Dr. Gozali, so if if a researcher publishes, as Dr. Preela brought up, I mean, one of his colleagues, I think, preferred to publish in an open access journal, and that paper had more citations, and it reached that number faster. So I guess if you equate that to bibliometric indices such as H index, then, and if suppose those are factors in judging whether you are hired to this research position, then by publishing in open access science and open access journals, then you have a better chance of moving ahead in your career. What do you think of that? And is that applicable to the medical research fields?
Yes, so actually there is a sort of compromise in that case, meaning that, of course, that to get promoted, you would need a high impact factor paper because you have more chances to be more cited when you publish over there, because there is a more, the scientific community actually looked at more at those papers than not the open access journal. But then it's true that what we really need in the medical field is to be cited. And sometimes a paper that is published in Nature but is cited 30 times because the institution does not have access to Nature journal, or a paper that is published in PLOS ONE but is cited 4,000 times, then is that what counts the most. So it's definitely a sort of compromise, because indeed we are evaluated by more parameters, and in the last grants, actually in the medical field, what is required is not just to mention the impact factor of the journal, but as well how many times your papers have been cited. And therefore there is a complete, let's say, open-minded vision in the recent year that as well benefits journals that are ranked a bit lower and not the top ones.
Excellent. Ms. Ralph, any points to contribute?
Nothing to add at this point. Thank you.
Excellent discussion. So I'll ask the next question to Dr. Gozzelino. In your opinion, what is the most important problem with open access publishing that the research community faces in today's day and age?
So to what concern the medical and the health science, I think that an open access journal would need to have an editorial board members that are very renowned to better capture the attention of the scientific community, which is often not the case. So if you look at open access journal, I mean, people are not the top scientists, because the top scientists as well, because their CV, they of course they wanted to be editors, academic editors in most famous journals. But that of course that is something that allows as well the journal to not grow. This in my view. The same things regards to the peer reviewing. Most of the time there are postdocs during the peer reviewing that are sometimes not as experienced, and especially because they still do not know, or senior PhD students, because they are they do not still have the qualification in order to really do a critical peer reviewing of that article. And all these together favor authors to publish in those journals research that is not top quality, especially because as well, since there is no such a strict peer reviewing, so then I mean, the journal is more inclined to accept a paper that might not even do not have access, or do not have even a chance in medium high impact factor papers. So the quality altogether, not just of the research, but also of the journal itself, is very important. And I do think that inserting some very renowned scientists in the field in those journals might definitely benefit the journal itself. Yeah.
Splendid. Professor Digri, any thoughts on this, from especially from the field of astrophysics and physics, in terms of challenge?
Perhaps more generally, I think there is a large proliferation of open access journals out there. Some are good, some are what's called predatory, right? Just out there to grab the money of unsuspecting authors. And it's not always easy to distinguish them. Some of the predatory journals are obvious because they're full of spelling mistakes and they're clearly a bogus operation. But some of the more sophisticated ones are sometimes very difficult to distinguish from genuine journals. And so I think that is a problem. Because you know, if you publish in a predatory journal, you cannot use it for career progression, and you cannot even put it on your CV. Well, you probably put in a lot of effort there. Until a few years ago, there was a blacklist circulating called Beale's List, which was very controversial. People used it as, you know, potential predatory journals. In the meantime, a number of non-profit organizations and publishers have come up with a new initiative called Think, Check, Submit. The website is thinkchecksubmit.org, which provides guidelines to authors as to how to assess whether or not a journal might be predatory or genuine. And so I think we're going in the right direction, but there is still a lot of work to be done there.
Excellent. Ms. Ralph, what do you have to say about the threat of predatory open access journals?
I think in addition to the danger of predatory journals and conferences, by the way, as well, they have now added an initiative, Richard, which is called Think, Check, Attend, you know, just to make sure people don't run into, that's the same initiative, it's DOAJ, and you know, you can check your conferences there now, Think, Check, Attend. Apart from that, I do, when it comes to open science publishing, I do see two main aspects to be actually put forward in the future, and one is metadata and the other is metrics. So I think when it comes to reproducibility, sustainability in open science, we really do need to work all together, all stakeholders, on data management, indexing procedures, monitoring, infrastructure, taxonomy, standards, etc., etc. And I mean, I'm coming from IEEE, and we produce standards, and the ironic thing is that in publishing you hardly have any standards established apart from at the submission level, where you hand in your formulas in certain formats, yes, and they have been standardized, but when it comes to monitoring reproducibility, we have very few standards and very, very few general metadata which has to be produced. And my fear always is that all this content would not be found anymore, or would not be reproducible. And I think this is from my perspective a crucial challenge we face when it comes to open access publishing.
Excellent. Dr. Preela, anything to add?
I can just agree to Dr. Gosselino. I think the biggest problem in my area is that there are only very few quality journals that are open access. And as a result, open access plays not a very big role at the moment. So there must be more quality journals. And as Dr. Gosselino before said, there are many factors for quality journals, editorial board, editors, many other points. So there's still a long way to go, I think, in my area.
Outstanding. Ms. Ralph, the next question. A lot of institutes or universities might or might not have defined guidelines for researchers on open access. What do you think universities and administrators, what can they do to promote open access and open science?
Well, I slightly disagree with the fact. I think a lot of very good or even not so good university and research institutions actually do provide a lot of help when it comes to promote open access. So that is about to change. But I think what is needed is to include the whole behavior and best practices, the whole education on scholarly communication, networking, and communication in general. That needs to be introduced from scratch. That means, I think, if my daughter, my son enters university, I think this is the moment when open science should be promoted, or should be taught, or should be on the education curriculum. I think this is increasingly important, especially when it comes to communicating your research activities and, of course, the outcome.
Exactly, I agree to you wholeheartedly. So, for example, in Europe there is Plan S and Coalition S, and there are U.S. legislation mandating that articles, from a certain government support or a body should be freely accessed, as in should be published under the Open Science. So, Dr. Preeler, do you have any comments on that? As in, are institutions promoting and guiding the researchers towards open science, maybe in your part of the world?
Anyway, I think it depends on the geographic area. I agree that there are changes, so I can see that many of my European colleagues, there's more and more push towards open access, and many of these institutions also support the open access. In this part of the world, in East Asia, where I'm at the moment, I would say there's not that much yet. And in that sense, I think it's more about as previously mentioned, about the ranking of the journals. So if there should really be a push towards open access, there must also be a bit rethinking about evaluations and so on. As long it stays in the current way, and as long there are not that many open access that are top-tier journals, there will not be much development in the area of open access, I think, in my specific area at least.
Excellent. Professor Degree?
Yeah, I actually wholeheartedly agree with what Michael just said. The problem, in my view, is we're not going for quality. We're going for metrics. We're going for the journal impact factor as the most important metric as to where to publish and where to get credit. A couple of years ago, there was a group of people that signed that came up with the San Francisco Declaration that people and institutions could sign. In essence, to say, well, look, we want to move away from that reliance on the impact factor. And I understand that even to date, many people and many institutions are actually signing that declaration, yet nothing is happening. They're still relying on the impact factor. And so I agree with Michael that unless anything is done to change that attitude, universities can promote open access. And in speaking about East Asia, I worked at Peking University and for 8.5 years until about 1.5 years ago. They were actually paying lip service to publishing open access. It was promoted, but you didn't get anything for it. So yeah, I mean, even in China, they're actually catching on to the idea of open access, but nothing has come from above, and that's what needs to happen in order to make that happen, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So from my experience in India, at least, open access, and it's not part of the medical curriculum as it is, as in it should be much more publicized, and students should all be given much more of an idea as to why it is a good idea to practice open science. So, Dr. Gozalina, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I think that everything has been said actually, because I can just agree with the colleagues and all what they said. So quality is what the university want, because according to the quality, then the university is ranked in turn. So of course that the more paper with quality, which means that they can be published in top journals or medium-high journals. So this is what the university are really looking for. They have basically, they needed to set some standard, because then like this, the universities or the institute is a renowned institute, because the quality of the institute is based as well on how many papers per year are published in that specific journals or journal above a certain impact factor. And unfortunately, the mentality regarding the impact factor is not changed yet, although we can find very nice research also in journals that are not as high. And we need that, because of course that not all research can be simply published in, speaking about medicine, in Nature, Cell and Science. We need as well data that are published in lower journals to really pursue then the research and see whether our research goes. that the publication in that journal is also a gamble, besides expensive, but sometimes you might work for 4 years, which is good if you have a very hot topic in your hands, but then it's a gamble to publish there because they are requiring more and more and more, which is okay, but it does not mean that if your research does not have all those, let's say, quality required, is not good. And this
Exactly.
is something that we really need to think about.
Exactly. In this day of information overload, we need more quality and less quantity. We can all agree to that, I guess. So, coming to the last couple of questions we have, the next question is addressed to both Professor Degree and Professor Preeler. Depositing papers or data in open access archives or repositories is an effective way to make them accessible globally. But do you think it is popularly used by researchers as much as I think you all think that they should?
If I can maybe start there, I think the answer is yes in the physical and natural sciences. I mentioned arXiv before, which has been running since the 1990s. That was originally for physics, astrophysics, computer science, economics, and things like that. Now it's also history and more generally the hard sciences. There have been a number of spin-offs in other fields like bioRxiv and in psychology too. In addition, most journals in the physical and natural sciences actually allow authors to post versions of their work to these repositories. It cannot be the final published version. It can be the accepted version before copy editing, for instance. And some of the top journals, including Nature and Science, actually expressly allow you to upload your paper to a repository. I actually checked this out earlier this year when we were lucky enough to have a paper accepted in Nature, and they actually say in their instructions that it's fine to do so. It's even fine to do so upon acceptance, and that is well before publication, as long as you don't share it with journalists.
Professor Preeler?
Okay, I kind of envy Professor Degree when I listen to him about the repositories and the archives, so it is so heavily used in his area. In my area, unfortunately, it's not that much yet. I hope this is increasing during the next years. There are other ways how academics try to make their work more accessible. It's not so ideal, but at least it's also a way to make it more accessible is basically academic social networking sites like ResearchGate and Academia.edu. It's also a way to make it more accessible. That's something that became very popular during the last few years, but the real open access archives unfortunately still play a very small role.
Interesting. So I also agree that in the subject area, there's a discrepancy in terms of how much you would likely use a repository or a data. In the omics fields, genomics fields, for example, I guess there is a scope for using data repositories. Dr. Guzzolino, what do you think about the usage of repositories and data archives in medical research?
Yeah, I think that is not as much used as it could be as well. And I share the view of Dr. Michael, actually, that there are other ways that as well in medicine papers are read better than not when are in repositories or archives. Like, for instance, ResearchGate is very much used by students as well as other popular type of things. And actually, recently, most of the paper are in Twitter, so the students are connected to that, or LinkedIn and social media are really playing a very, very nice role in spreading science worldwide. Yeah.
Excellent. Ms. Ralph, anything to contribute regarding this?
Well, I must say I was told to always distinguish repositories into preprints, institutional, and subject repositories. And I would agree that the preprints, I think, especially arXiv or bioRxiv or the medical preprint service, the new ones, are highly successful. When it comes to subject repositories like the medical subject repositories from the NIS, for example, on the NIH in PubMed, that has been highly successful as well. When it comes to institutional mandates and repositories, I think there we only see an average uptake of up to 25% only. So I think I would not consider them to be that successful, although all institutions, almost every institution has a green repository by now. So I always distinguish between those three. That's all I wanted to add there.
Excellent. So we are at the last question of the selected 10 questions, and after this we'll take some audience questions as well. So the last question is back to Ms. Ralph. A lot of researchers express their apprehension towards the viability of open access journals in the long run. What is your opinion on this?
Makes me laugh a bit, because I do agree, everyone loves it, but when it comes to actually do it and publish and abide by mandates, they don't. You see, so it really does depend on the intention of your work as well. So if you look into researchers like we have here on the panel, maybe still hoping to file patents or not, of course they wouldn't necessarily use and abide by open access or open science mandates and ideas. Yeah, so I do think everybody likes it as a general idea, as a credo, everything, but when it comes to actually use it, then the opinions divide a lot.
Excellent. Dr. Gozalino, what do you think? As in, if there could be multiple versions of the same articles, pre-print, post-print, post-second peer review, etc. And publication of articles is not, especially in open access, it may not be according to merit. So what do you think? Is this model sustainable in the long run?
Yes, I do think that it's sustainable actually, because as I previously said, in health and medical science, open access journals are mostly publishing reviews and opinions and hypotheses, which then are the basis for research papers as well. And actually there is something that journals are frequently doing, meaning that to open special issues or research topics on special areas. And if the research topic or special issue is successful enough to recruit a very renowned scientist, which sometimes it is, so actually it keeps basically increasing as well the visibility of the journal itself. And yeah, my experience with that is yes. So I edited some of research topic in my areas of work, and yeah, we were really successful actually in managing to gather worldwide leading expert on that field. And I have to say that one of the research topic, it has been the most downloaded topic for over 2 years by now. So I do think that they are viable in the long run.
Splendid. Professor Preela, especially from the economic point of view, financial stability of the model, what do you think? Is open access as a financial model, is it sustainable?
Yeah, it seems it seems the authors have to pay quite a lot of money anyway, so it seems to be sustainable. But to come to the general question, as I said, in my field, it plays still a small role, but I have at least the hope that it will play a bigger role in the future, because I think the general idea, as Mrs. Ralph said, everybody likes it, but nobody wants to publish there, kind of. So that's a bit a problem, but and that's probably connected. I think there must be a bit of system change, as I previously mentioned, in order that there's maybe more. It should be really about the quality that is evaluated of the article, and not just the ranking of the journal and the impact factor of the journal and these kind of things, which are very easy for universities to evaluate. I know that the quality is more difficult to evaluate. And also, as previously mentioned, it's kind of a circle actually. the universities pressure the researchers to do that because the universities are pressured by the governments and by the university rankings to have a certain amount of publications and so on in a certain type of journals. So in that sense, it's a very big system which has to change, and probably this takes a very long time, if ever, but I'm hopeful, let's put it in that way.
I agree. Professor Degree, so when I was doing some research on from IOP in 2004, and which said that it's not a sustainable model, and recently European Physical Society also sort of said that this may not be, as in if you push it, especially through Coalition S and Plan S, if you push it too much, it may break. So what do you think, especially from the point of view that physics and physical sciences is where it all started?
Yeah, I think what you just said about that study, I missed part of what you said because the sound fell away. I think I agree with that sentiment in general. Looking at journals that might be successful in the open access arena, I think the meta journals might actually do well, like PLOS One, for instance. That might be sustainable in the long run. Regular journals, possibly not, particularly not in the context of Plan S. I think that indeed they're pushing that too much. But some very niche areas and very narrowly confined topic areas would actually be sustainable as well in the long run, because you have a very specialized readership there. I have not much else to say about that, actually.
Excellent. I think that brings us to the end of this webinar. Before we leave, I'd like to thank Professor Degree, Professor Preeler, Ms. Ralph, and Dr. Gozolino for contributing their wonderful insights into the world of open access. I hope the listeners and viewers benefited from it. Before we leave, one quick announcement. We have an offer going for the course, the pros and cons of open access in Inago Learn. The coupon code is given right here, Inago Webinar 20, and you get a 20% off for this course if you use this coupon code. So once again, thank you very much.